Hello, everyone. Welcome to the One Stop Business Workshop. I'm Audreanna Lartey, the project lead in the Business and Rights Department here at the CBC. And I'm also in charge of managing the One Stop Business Workshop network. For those who are blind or have low vision, I'm a Black female with curly braided hair sitting in my office at the CBC Toronto building. I'm really delighted to be your moderator for this session. Today, we're going to be kicking off our Canada Now series, and this is the first session, and it's entitled, What Do Canadian Audiences Want? We're going to explore what Canadians are watching and what they want to see. Presenting today are my esteemed colleagues, Johanna Holmes, Senior Director, Audience Research here at CBC, as well as Katrina Dobson, Lead Analyst in the CBC's Marketing and Communications Department. By the end of this session, we hope that you will have a better insight into what audiences are kind of looking into, some of their habits, and I hope this information stays with you as you develop and grow your projects. We intend for this session to be a bit interactive. Here, you'll find the Slido QR code, and we invite you to join by scanning it. If you go to, and it will take you to slido.com. And there will be throughout the presentation, the Slido meeting number. If you cannot access it for whatever reason, feel free to kind of put your answers in the chat. So stick around to the end, and we will have some time for live questions, and you'll get a chance to put those in the Zoom Q&A function. If we're not able to answer your question, we'll do our best to get around to it in our comprehensive follow-up document, which will come to you by the end of this series. Please note that ASL, closed captioning, and French translations are available if you are in the Zoom. Before we get started, I'd like to do a land acknowledgement. I wish to acknowledge those Indigenous nations on whose lands we live and work, as well as the treaty territories, the unceded territories, and the nations from coast to coast, which we conduct our daily business. Now, for the presentation, over to you, Johanna and Katrina.
Thank you, Audriana. If you go to the next slide, the first slide. Wanted to do a brief introduction. My name is Johanna Osenya Holmes. I'm the Senior Director of Audience Research here at the CBC. I am currently working from home in my home office in North Etobicoke, Rexdale. I'm wearing a black shirt and my hair is in a ponytail. I'm Filipino Canadian. I was born in the Philippines and became a citizen in 1990. So you can do the math on that. And I'm going to throw it to Katrina to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Katrina Dobson. So I work with Johanna on our audience research team at the CBC. I'm the team lead on the custom research portfolio. So basically, my team works on survey data. We talk to Canadians. A quick visual description of me. I'm in my home office. I'm sitting in front of white curtains. There's a window behind me. I'm an older millennial. I have long brown hair, black rimmed glasses, and I'm wearing a denim button-up shirt. And I'm going to throw it back to Johanna.
Yes, so combined, Katrina and I have about 40 years of experience working in media and media research specifically, and we are very excited to share some of what we've learned with all of you today. So today, if you go to the next slide, we'd like to cover a lot of topics. So we're going to go look at the changing media landscape, which I know you're all aware of and living through, going into content consumption habits, and then motivations for why people consume content, and then going into what interests Canadians, what type of content are Canadians interested in, and then lastly, what are Canadians watching? But before that, we wanted to throw up, start with a quiz. So if we go to the slide, So you can input your answer at Slido. There's a number there. Which percentage of Canadian households still subscribe to paid television? Whether that's through cable or satellite, subscribe through Bell or Rogers or Cogeco. Is it 20, 40, 60, or 80? We'll give it just a few seconds. All right. So most of you thought it was 40. Still a little bit of shifting here. The answer is 60. So 60% of Canadian households are still paying that cable bill. So I'm going to now throw it to Katrina.
Thanks, Joanna. As we mentioned, this presentation is titled "What Canadians Are Watching," but we felt like we needed to set the stage a little bit with how Canadians are watching, because that's really the piece that has changed so much in recent years, and our indicators of success are still shifting as a result of that. So Joanna and I are constantly being asked from producers at the CBC, how is my show performing, or what are Canadians watching? And that question has gotten a lot harder for us to answer because there are just so many ways that someone can consume a piece of content. And unfortunately, we don't have just one database that includes all the different platforms, even though the industry is trying. So we think that it's really helpful information to know how Canadians are watching when we start thinking about what Canadians are watching. So if we look at the next slide, this is related to the quiz you all just did, but traditional television is in decline, but a substantial number of Canadian households still subscribe to paid television. So this comes as no surprise to many of you, I'm sure, but one of the most influential changes we've seen in this industry over the past couple decades has really been that decline in traditional television. And it matters because the industry really hasn't adjusted yet. It's still, in many ways, one of the primary indicators of success for a television program, at least among traditional broadcasters like us at the CBC. So, year over year, when we look at the available television audience, we're seeing about a 5 to 10% decline in the audience on television. And it's definitely impacting our ratings at the CBC. We have to keep adjusting our benchmarks and our targets for these programs. But we still do want to emphasize that despite the declines in viewerships, many households still do have access to traditional television, as we've talked about 6 in 10. And we find that viewers really tend to tune into those big live events like the Super Bowl or the Academy Awards or the Stanley Cup Finals. Those things that people need to watch live is really what we're seeing when we're seeing those big audiences to traditional television. But overall, fewer Canadians have access to traditional television and they spend less of their content consumption time with that content. If we look at the next slide, we can see that SVOD subscriptions. So we're going to have a lot of, I'm going to caveat this, we're going to have a lot of acronyms in this presentation, but we will explain them to you. So SVOD is streamed video on demand. So that's like Netflix or Amazon Prime or Disney Plus. So we're seeing that subscriptions to SVOD had been rising for many years, but they really flattened out in the past 5 years or so. It seems that we've really reached a bit of a saturation point. And it really only took about 20 years to get here. Netflix only started offering streaming around 2007. So about 8 in 10 Canadians say they subscribe or have access to at least one SVOD service, which is higher than that 60% that we see subscribing to traditional television. Then on the next slide, we're looking at stacking those streamed video on demand services. So that's still very common. So stacking refers to having more than one service. So having your Amazon and your Netflix and your Disney, that would be stacking. It's still very common, but we've seen declines in recent years. So like overall subscriptions to SVOD, Subscribing to three or more services peaked around 2022. And at that point, about half of all Anglophone households subscribed to three or more services. And now we're down to about 40%. So we're kind of attributing this to people have been looking for ways to maybe cut costs and save money. And this is one of the ways that maybe people are doing that. They're willing to sacrifice a little bit of the variety of content available to them. And then on the next slide, we're talking about the rise of AVOD and FAST. So AVOD is advertising-based video on demand. So very similar to SVOD, but there's advertising in there. It's relatively new. You can see it's only been measured in this data source for less than 5 years, but it reaches a huge chunk of the population, with 85% saying they watched via AVOD in the past month. So a lot of streamers are now offering a cheaper version of their product with advertising included. So it's not really surprising that this has caught on, especially because we're seeing that people have access to multiple streaming services. And as we saw in the previous slide, this could be a way for people to save some money, pay that cheaper version and watch some ads while you're doing it. And then FAST is another thing that we're seeing come up in the past few years. So that's free ad-supported streaming television. So this is relatively new, and it's basically linear television on a streaming service. You press play and you're watching just whatever happens to be on the feed at that moment. You don't get to pick your content, you don't fast forward or rewind, you're just watching an online stream basically. But we've seen this growing quite a bit. It's still relatively small, but nearly a fifth of the Canadian population say they watched FAST in the past month. And then on the next slide, we're looking at YouTube. So YouTube is a platform where we've seen a ton of growth, but also a lot of differences between generations. So here on this slide, we're telling you that more than 7 in 10 Canadians aged 18 to 65 watch YouTube at least weekly. So the last couple slides, we were looking at monthly usage. This is weekly usage. So it's really like a lot more. And we also find that for people in their 30s, about 8 in 10 are watching weekly, and for people in their 60s, only about half are watching weekly. So there's definitely some differences in the generation in terms of YouTube, but still very, very widely used among Canadians for content consumption. And then the next slide. So Netflix is still the #1 streaming service, followed fairly closely by Amazon Prime Video, and then Disney sits at #3 with about 35% of Canadians subscribed or having access to Disney Plus. So again, we also see some differences in age for these streaming services. So younger Canadians, so you'll see that 18 to 34 and the 35 to 49 are more likely to use those top 3 streaming services compared to older Canadians. And that's primarily just because they're streaming more in general. And then you can see that the older Canadians at 65 plus are less likely to use all of the streaming services because they're more likely just to be still consuming traditional television. Next slide. Another way that Canadians are consuming content is short form video, which has become very popular in the last several years. So it was really younger groups who were early adopters of these short form video content, but it's now really used by all ages. And it's really been like companies like Meta and YouTube have really pushed this content to the forefront of a lot of the social media interfaces as a way to retain their audience and to keep younger people interested in platforms that otherwise had aging user bases. So just, short, easy to consume, easy to digest content, super popular. And then on the next slide, we are also noting that we're keeping an eye on video clipping. So we don't have any numbers around this yet, but we've noticed that this is a trend that has really been powered by that rise of short form vertical video. And this, again, thrives on emotion and immediacy and high shareability. And a lot of these companies like Netflix and we're seeing influencers and politicians, they're designing content specifically to be clipped. And it's exactly what it sounds like. Just a little piece is being clipped from a longer form. So it's certainly something to watch for, and it fits within that rise of shorter form content. And then on the next slide, We just wanted to really drive home the point that different generations consume content differently. So for Canadians aged 65 plus, about 87% of their time spent consuming video is with linear or traditional television, so that cable, satellite, that sort of television, and only 13% is spent with like pure plays, which are your streaming services. And then for Canadians 18 to 34, younger Canadians, about 33% of their time consuming video content is with linear or traditional television, and 67% is with pure plays. So, a big difference in how these generations are consuming content. And now I'm going to throw it over to Johanna.
Thanks, Katrina. So now that we know more about the changing media landscape overall, I'm going to present the next section and go further into how Canadians are consuming this content. So Canadians use mobile phones more than any device, and I think all of us here can attest to that. How many of us have our phones right beside us right now? About 9 in 10, that's 88% of Canadians, use their mobile phones to consume entertainment content. Some of that will be audio, of course, just because it's, a small device, but a significant number of Canadians are watching video content on this small screen. About 2/3 use a laptop, and the same number are using a smart TV or an internet connected large screen TV. So, again, just something to keep in mind from a visual standpoint. People are not necessarily just watching entertainment content on large screens. They're consuming it on small screens, in their hands, and taking it with them on the go, beyond just sitting at home on a couch in front of a large TV. But again, they're using other devices too at other times. When we look at consumption, content consumption by time of day, we know that Canadians have their phones with them all the time throughout the day. But in terms of the other devices, we know that TV usage really increases in the evenings when people are at home and looking to unwind and relax. And so that's TV usage, whether it's through a traditional TV or a smart TV. People are watching that big screen at night. Computers are naturally higher, a little higher during the day because people are at work and using their laptops and their computers, but usage does tend to go down at night when people are turning on their big screens. Radio is used during the daytime hours because, as we know, radio prime time is in the morning when people are turning on the radio to get their vital information to start their day. And the next slide, you will all understand this. Canadians are very busy. We can all relate, particularly the target sales demographic of adults 25 to 54. They're working full time. They're more likely to have kids at home, have aging parents and responsibilities, have busy schedules and busy social lives. So this is a summary of really how busy Canadians are and what they're doing at the same time in order to be more efficient. And while people are multitasking, we know that there's a lot of passive content consumption and a lot of things happening at the same time. Maybe we're all guilty of this. Some amount of TV viewing is done while people are eating, just doing two things at once. People are consuming local news while they're getting ready in the morning. While you're in bed trying to go to sleep, the TV is on and people are watching TV. In order to relax, people are still turning on all forms of media to do so. When you have people over, you're watching sports or a big show together. And this is an interesting finding. When you're cooking, some people are watching food and cooking type content. And while you're exercising, people are watching health and fitness content. So there's always something happening. People are busy and just trying to catch up and multitask. And I'm throwing back to Katrina.
Thanks, Joanna. So on the next slide, we're looking at motivations for watching content throughout the day. So if we can switch, there we go. So this is a bit of a busy slide, but on the left there are reasons for consuming content, and across the top is the time of day. So what we can see here is that while Canadians feel the need to be informed in the morning or even inspired in the morning, their main reason for consuming content in the evenings is to be entertained and to relax and to unwind or to escape from reality at night. So I think we can all kind of relate to this cycle. In the morning, you might be a little bit more likely to check the news on your phone, but by the evening, you just want to sit on the couch and relax and maybe think a little bit less and consume content passively, maybe open a bag of chips, that sort of thing. And then on the next slide, in addition to wanting different content at different times, Canadians also have distinct motivations for tuning to different platforms for their content. So they turn to live television or traditional television to be both informed and entertained. Typically, the informed is kind of in the morning and entertained is in the evening. They tune to Netflix to unwind, to be entertained, and to escape reality. People don't typically tune to Netflix to be informed or inspired, not really. And they turn to YouTube to be entertained, but also to explore and to learn. So for YouTube, we find that it often depends on the length of the video. So a lot of the long form content on YouTube is likely to inspire or to inform, like people are watching how-to videos, that sort of thing. And then a lot of the short form content on YouTube is really for entertainment purposes. And then on the next slide, we're looking at the way that Canadians, or I guess how Canadians choose what to stream. So the number one way that Canadians of all ages choose what to stream is really recommendations. We're calling it recommendations from close social influences, but it's from family, friends, or roommates, people you live with. That's how we sort of define that to Canadians when we ask them that question. So while all ages are just as likely to rely on family and friends to recommend content, and that's their top way of finding new content, younger Canadians are actually significantly more likely than older Canadians to rely on social media and to rely on streaming services for discovering new content. And then on the next slide, we also wanted to show that there seem to be some differences in how Canadians choose what to stream based on the platform. So on a bigger or a more popular platform like Netflix, people are paying more attention to what the service recommends or to what is popular on the service. And this kind of suggests to us that perhaps people are kind of choosing to watch the service sometimes. Whereas with a mid-sized service, so here we used Crave as the example, people are more likely, excuse me, people are more likely to say they go to the service knowing what they want to watch. And for me, at least, and maybe to some of you, anecdotally, that makes a lot of sense. I sometimes turn on Netflix. If I don't know what to watch, I'll just turn on Netflix and I'll browse through it the way I used to flip through channels back when I had cable. But smaller services, I typically only go to when the piece of content that I want to watch is actually available on that service. And now I'm going to throw it back to Johanna for the next section.
Thank you. So now that we know what motivates people to choose their content and on which platform, we wanted to look at the top genres that Canadians watch and why they choose to watch their top programs. So we're going to start off with a look at the top genres in Canada's and what Canadians are watching. On a weekly basis, just over half of Canadians say they watch drama or comedy programming, and about a third watch reality. Sports is up there too, and this has been pretty consistent for years, and it's in line with our top programs and that Katrina will present later on in this presentation. There's only really a few small differences between the generations and how they act, what genres they are choosing to watch. Older Canadians are less likely to watch reality, with only 26% saying that they watch reality weekly, compared to 37% of those under the age of 30 who watch reality TV. Older Canadians are also less likely to watch lifestyle shows, health and fitness, food and cooking, daytime talk, and travel. Basically, Younger Canadians want more unscripted content, and less so for older Canadians. And overall, older Canadians are more likely to watch news in a typical week. And before we launch into more slides, I wanted to go to the next slide, ask you, how do you decide what to watch? When you're just sitting there, how do you decide? What makes you decide on a show? So if you could just write down your choices and your options on why you choose to watch what you watch. So really interesting here. It's very similar to what Katrina was saying before, that buzz, the social. You're looking to see from your friends and family what they're recommending. Another one here is recommendations from critics. And there's someone here who cycles through streaming services and just browsing until they find something interesting. But what's interesting and popping up here is the word buzz. Really, you're tuning into what other people are talking about. Adaptations of books, previews, depth, world-class content. And again, another vote for friends and family and suggestions from your streaming service. Promos and trailers. A website called A Good Movie to Watch was named as a good resource. Yeah. Yes, there's so much out there, but it's very true. So it looks like it's really the buzz from your friends and recommendations from your friends and family that really pop up. Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. This is amazing, and it really coincides with what the next slide. And really, so we asked Canadians overall, what was the most important reason for them to watch a show? So overall, the plot line was the key driver in their decision-making process. Elements of escapism, relatability, and how different the show is compared to others were also important. And access to the program is also a key driver. Is it on a streaming service I already have access to? And that is something that never came up even just a few years ago in terms of why people choose shows. What's also important here, which is kind of interesting, is that element of what am I getting myself into? So before people start a show and decide to watch a show, they're thinking, are there upcoming seasons? How long are the episodes? Is the season complete and can I binge it? How many total episodes are out there? There's so many different factors that go into why you would watch a show. And talent. The characters and the actors and actresses in the show are also important, but overall, it's that plot that was the most important. What is less important? Overall, the next slide. Interesting. It's that social buzz that's not really the make or break. How buzzy the show is on social media and the director or the producer and who made the show is not as important. Or the number of awards that a show receives are really not likely the key reasons why viewers might decide to watch a specific program. What's interesting here also is that in the previous slide, we showed that diversity of characters and stories are important at 58%. Having characters that look like me is less so important in terms of choosing a show. Other studies have also shown similar results, with people really preferring authentic portrayals and well-written stories and plots with diversity in its backbone, over just someone that just ticking a box with someone that looks like me. We have heard time and time again that it is really not important, that it is really important not to lean into stereotypes and box ticking. Do it right and really fold it into the overall plot line. And moving on to the next slide, what about Canadian content? Recent industry reports have shown that international, so non-Canadian streaming services make up the vast majority of overall revenue. The US giants like Netflix, Disney Plus, and Amazon Prime Video are reshaping the landscape and our market. They're attracting our share of time and our share of our wallet. Only about 1 in 5, so that's 21% of Canadians, feel that it is important to consume Canadian made content. So, what we found is that Canadians really haven't cared that much about Canadian content, at least not in recent years. They're continuing to watch the big American shows and streaming services. And we've heard from Canadians that, it feels different, that they feel that when they're watching a Canadian show, it just looks and feels different. But I'm sure you all know, in recent months, we have seen a renewal in Canadian pride, a sense of repatriotism in Canada, which is unrelated to media, but may also impact media. We've got some early indicators that Canadians are saying that they are willing to watch less American content and more, less American content and more Canadian content. We conducted a recent study, and about 2/3 of Canadians told us they were more proud to be Canadian than they were a year ago. And about 1 in 3 said they were watching more Canadian TV networks, streaming services, and shows. So we're continuing to watch this data, this change in our Canadian landscape, and we will watch the data trends as they unfold. So we wanted to include in this presentation some quotes from actual Canadians about what they want to watch. So we asked them, what do you feel is missing from the shows and movies that are available today? And a lot of what came back was stuff that we already talked about: plot, storylines, character development, and content that is original and genuine. So, just like reading a few of these quotes, I think sitcoms are missing intelligence. I don't enjoy watching them as the humor is predictable and just not funny. What's missing is character depth and good storylines. Most of the shows and movies are now not genuine. The comedy seems forced, horrors are not horrifying, and there's a lack of logic. I won't say something is missing. I just feel the shows or movies should reflect more on the ordinary people's lives and the world. We're missing complex female characters. Although we're seeing more female leads, there's still a need for well-rounded, complex female characters who aren't solely defined by their relationships to men. And with that, I'm going to throw it back to Katrina.
Thanks, Joanna. So now we're going to get into what Canadians are watching. So next slide. So first we have another quiz for you. So we are asking you, what was the top Canadian program, so Canadian program, on traditional television during the 24-25 season? So this is our linear cable programming. So we've got Law and Order Toronto, Criminal Intent, Murdoch Mysteries, Canada's Got Talent, or Matlock. I'll give you some time to vote. pop in and spoil the answer for you there. So it seems that you're all paying attention to what Canadians are watching because Law and Order Toronto Criminal Intent was the top show, top Canadian show on television this past season. And most of you knew that, so that's great. So on the next slide, we're looking at top television shows in Canada. So this is a bit of a tricky slide to read because there's a lot going on here. But the table on the left is the top 20 programs in Canada. So not necessarily Canadian programs, but top 20 programs in Canada this past season. And the table on the right is the top 20 Canadian programs in Canada this past season. So this is linear television only. So that's our primarily cable, satellite, sort of thing, because again, we do have to look at all of these platforms separately. So something to note right away, there are no Canadian programs in the top 20 programs overall. So as Johanna mentioned, Canadians are watching primarily American programming on traditional television. It's also mostly dramas. And many of these programs have been around for a long time, or they're part of a franchise. Like we've got our two 911s up there sitting at number 1 and number 4. We've got a couple FBIs in there, NCIS in the top 20. There's also a lot of police or police adjacent type programs in the top 20. We did see 5 new programs make their way into the top 20 this year, though there was still familiarity with a couple of them. So Matlock came in at number 2, but again, that's a reboot, so it's not brand new. And then NCIS Origins came in at number 16, and again, that's part of the NCIS franchise. But we've got High Potential at number 3, and then Dr. Odyssey and Rescue High Surf at number 19 and 20. And then when we look at our top Canadian programs, CBC, this is where we shine. We've got about half of the top Canadian programs in Canada. And we have seen a couple three new programs made their way into the top 20 Canadian programs this year. All 3 of them were dramas. I should also mention that all 5 of the top new programs were dramas. So on the Canadian side of things, St. Pierre, which was a new CBC program, came in at number 5, and that one's another police drama. And then Murder in a Small Town was a new one that came in at number 8, and Mistletoe Murders came in at number 18. But rounding out the top 5 Canadian programs, we've got Law and Order Toronto, as we saw in the quiz earlier. Then Canada's Got Talent, Murdoch Mysteries, Family Law, and St. Pierre are the top 5 Canadian programs in Canada this past year. And then on the next slide, we'll get into top streaming shows. So for these, we pulled these as of June. So these are the top programs on these services as of June 2nd is the date that we pulled these. So I'll start with Netflix, and I'll just kind of touch on some of these programs. So often when I see a top 10 list for Netflix, it usually contains a lot of programs that I've seen on social media, or I've heard people talk about. That buzz piece really fits in with Netflix. So yesterday, for example, I had a physio appointment, and I asked my physiotherapist if she'd watched any good shows lately, and she said she discovered the Tylenol Murders on Netflix and she loved it. And you can see that's number 7 here as of the beginning of June. And then I've also heard a lot of buzz about Sirens, which is sitting there at number 3. And I've also seen a lot of buzz around the 4 Seasons, which I ended up watching because I like the cast for it, Tina Fey and Steve Carell. And then we're also seeing on Netflix that franchise piece here that we see on linear television as well. So Mission Impossible Final Reckoning is on the horizon. So we're seeing Dead Reckoning Part 1 surging back into the spotlight. That sort of thing. And then over on Prime Video, the final season of The Handmaid's Tale has performed well. They've done a lot of marketing around that and a lot of interesting marketing. They did a story selection on TikTok, and they premiered the show in some key markets ahead of time. So that one has performed really well. And then, not surprising, given the recent passing of Pope Francis, Conclave moved into the top 10 at number 8 there on Prime Video. And then if we go on to the next slide, on Crave, we've got Mickey 17 at number 1, which is a science fiction comedy starring Robert Pattinson. And then at number 2, we've got 28 Days Later, which has seen a resurgence because the movie 28 Years Later is launching. And then The Last of Us rounds out the top 3. That's another post-apocalyptic show. And then on the other side of the slide, we've got Disney. So at number 2, 28 Weeks Later. So also, because of 28 Years Later coming out soon. And then we've got a couple Mission Impossibles there. So that franchise piece comes out here too as well. And then Marvel content always does well. So Captain America is sitting at number 1 on the Disney streaming service. And then on the next slide, on Apple TV, we can see that Ted Lasso is still hanging around in the top 10. That was a pretty big show for Apple. Murderbot is a new sci-fi series with Alexander Skarsgård as the lead. That's sitting at number 2. And then Fountain of Youth at number 1 is an action adventure with John Krasinski and Natalie Portman. And then looking at Gem, so you'll see that 6 of our top 10 titles are Canadian. So this is really where Canadians are streaming Canadian content. So Schitt's Creek and Heartland and Murdoch Mysteries are Canadian titles that are some of our top programs on Gem. And then the other 4 out of the 10 titles on Gem are British titles. So Coronation Street has been number 1 for us for years. It just continues. It has a huge following and continues to do really well. And then other British shows like The Great British Baking Show, Call the Midwife, and Escape to the Country are doing well on Gem as well. So when we kind of look at these top titles on all these streaming services, we're really seeing kind of the same as what we see on traditional television, where we're seeing that sort of blend of franchise strength, but also some individual new creative risk type programs. So a real blend of old and new. And then on the next slide, we have another question or another poll to ask you. So what was the best show that you watched in the past year? And it doesn't have to be a new show, but just, what have you watched lately, The Pit, that you've enjoyed? Severance. Or Murderbot. Somebody's already watched Murderbot. Studio. North of North, CBC. We're very proud of that one. And even with this, looking at this come in there, like there is a mix of old and new, right? Corner Gas coming up, an old Canadian comedy. The Last of Us. And very few people have said the same thing. Like there's just so much out there that people can watch. Pit and Studio both have 3 votes, but other than that, it's been pretty younger. Seeing a few CBC Gem programs popping up. Love Island. Just so many options. Yellowstone. Yeah, the variety is just amazing. Like there's just so much for people to watch. See one person still typing. We'll give it a minute. So many Korean dramas. Yeah. Amazing. Yeah, thank you all for sharing. And it just shows like that wide range of programs available to people. Okay, so we'll go on to the next slide. Here's another slide where we wanted to show you some quotes from real Canadians. So we asked them, what would you personally like to see more of in shows and movies in the future? And what we found, hopefully not surprising at this point, is that people really want a good plot, a good storyline, originality, honest, genuine characters. But what we also saw come out a little bit was this element of the world is hard and I want something more feel good. Give me something inspiring and heartfelt, which probably speaks to why something like Ted Lasso has done so well and continues to be a top program for Apple at this point. And the other thing that kind of stood out here, which also fits into that feel good piece, was that Canadians were really calling for better comedies and more humor. So if you recall, when we talked about top programs on television, there were a lot of dramas in that top 20. But Big Bang Theory was actually the #1 program in Canada for years. But since that program ended, we haven't had a comedy be the top program in Canada. And that one ended back in 2019. So it's been a few years since we've had a comedy as a top program in Canada. Young Sheldon did really well. It was #3 when it launched, and remained at #3 for a couple years. And then The Conners also did well in its premiere season. It was in the top 10 at #6. But really, that top programs list the last few years has really been full of dramas. And as you recall from a couple slides earlier, when Johanna talked about genres, Canadians were just as likely to want to watch comedies as dramas, and dramas. So I think there's a gap there, maybe waiting to be filled. And the other thing about that is that we really see people watching comedies over and over again. So we're seeing that right now on CBC's streaming service, Gem, with Schitt's Creek. It's been off the air for over 5 years and it's still drawing massive views for us. And I don't think it's people watching it for the first time. It's people watching it over and over. So I'll read out a couple of these quotes. I'd like to see more humor. The world is so full of hate and anger. I'd like to see less murder-based serial killer shows and more comedy. I'd like to see more genuine characters, more happy, heartfelt shows and are inspirational. I want to see more unique, culturally rich storytelling. I'd like to watch more movies, more shows and movies talking about ordinary people and their lives in a slightly funny way. Definitely a lot more original content that hasn't ever been done or there hasn't been a lot of, and making new stars instead of the same stars being used over and over. I'd like to see more character development in shows and movies. I feel like I bond less with characters than I used to. So a lot of those same themes coming out that we've talked about throughout this presentation. And then on the next slide, we're just going to wrap some things up here. So in summary, just to remind you all what we talked about today, there are just so many places that Canadians can consume entertainment content, and we really see those choices being different among different generations. So younger Canadians leaning more towards a streaming, older Canadians leaning more towards that traditional television piece. But everybody's got a lot of different places that they're watching content. Canadians are busy. They multitask. They have their phones on them all the time. Their phones are in their hands or in their pockets, and they're consuming a lot of content on those small screens. And they're also consuming a lot of short content on those small screens. Generally speaking, obviously there's some nuance to this, but Canadians want to be informed in the mornings, and evenings are used primarily for entertainment, to unwind, to relax, very passive consumption, don't want to think, just sit on the couch and call it a day. Canadians still primarily are relying on friends and family to tell them what to watch, and we saw that in the poll that you all participated in. But increasingly, we're seeing and primarily younger Canadians saying that they're relying on those streaming services to tell them what to watch, what's popular, and what they recommend. And then on the next slide. Drama and comedy are still the top genres, and they have been for years. And what really matters is that overall plot, the storyline, and characters. And the one piece that's coming out that we haven't really seen before is that we're really seeing that access to content is becoming more of a driver, and really what it's doing is becoming more of a barrier, because people just don't have access to all the different streaming services. So you hear about a new program and you want to watch it, but you don't have Apple TV, so you can't watch it. Or you sign up for the free 30 days and then you cancel it. So that's really coming into play a lot, is just people not all having access to the same content. And then currently, Canadians are still watching a lot of American dramas and lots of police dramas, and we're still seeing that familiarity, like franchises and nostalgia, and reboots, also remain really important drivers for Canadians to watch content. But we're definitely seeing an appetite for new content, and as Johanna was saying, that Canadian piece with Canadians saying that they're more interested in consuming Canadian content than they have been in recent years. And it's really that relatable, genuine, feel-good content with original storylines, complex and diverse characters. That's really what Canadians are asking for. And that brings us to the end of our presentation.
Amazing. That was amazing content. Thank you so much, Joanna and Katrina. At this time, we're going to open up the Q&A function. So if you want to leave some questions for Katrina and Joanna, we can. I do have one, and I know you touched on it. It's just what are some of the most significant shifts you've observed in the Canadian audience, like consumption habits for film, digital, or television? Over the, let's make it more broad, like 2 to 3 years. Are there any unexpected trends?
I can start. In terms of unexpected trends, I mean, this digital transformation has been happening for the past few years. So yes, it's that when we're talking about our competition for the CBC, it's not just another television station. It is everything. The competition for time is is critical. How do we, people are consuming things at the same time and just choosing to spend more time with services that we generally sometimes don't even have an oversight on with our current data sets. When we're looking at TV data, we're seeing TV data. When we're looking at digital data, we're seeing digital data, right? So it's hard to, and we're trying our best to put together a holistic view of content and time spent because really we're just trying to fight for everyone's attention. And it's critical in order to get ahead of that. And as we all know, that what we're doing so many things at once and accessing things and content that the sky's the limit right now with content choices. It is so overwhelming and it's hard to compete when we have our traditional schedule to an infinite number of content that's out there. So it's not really like in recent years, but we're still trying to get ahead of it. And Katrina, anything to add?
Yeah, just to add to that, I often say I have a 5-year-old boy, and I often say that it's he discovered Walt Disney's Silly Symphonies on YouTube. They're over 100 years old. So like we're not competing with just, Murdoch Mysteries Monday night at 8 o'clock isn't just competing with what else is on Monday night at 8 o'clock like it used to. It's literally competing with any content that has been made in the last 100 years that people can access. And j just one other thing that for me, maybe one an unexpected trend is the short form stuff. I never like I knew that technology would change the way we're consuming content, but I think that maybe it has also caused people to change a little bit. Like I worry that younger people are a little bit less likely to sit and watch longer form content with like a drawn out plot and more likely to want those like short, snappy, immediate gratification type content. So just maybe that rise in short form stuff has been a little bit of a surprise for me. And it's
And
taking time away from some of the other stuff.
these are good, these are great points. Thank you. We have an audience question that's come in. With GEM and traditional broadcasts, which age demo does CBC currently lean towards, or more importantly, want to attract more of?
So traditionally, as a service, we do skew older. We are a legacy and traditional broadcaster. So a lot of our content, whether it is on traditional linear platforms, as well as some of our digital content, does tend to skew older. However, we have found in with richer data sets, we are seeing our digital audience on GEM is younger than our traditional linear TV audience for CBC TV. So we're seeing that. But compared to the competition, we are still older even on GEM compared to our competition. And our target and our strategy would still be to try to grow younger for kind of future proofing, trying to look to the next generation in order to maintain relevancy. We have our old audience, but we do need to focus and grow younger just for business or as a business objective.
So I guess a follow-up to that is how does CBC Gem rank compared to international streamers and Canadian streaming options based on Canadian market share?
So it's quite a bit lower when we look at those big streamers. Like you saw that Netflix is well over half of all Canadians have access to it. Gem is sitting down at around 10% or even a little bit lower. So there is a big difference there. In terms of just Canadian streamers, I don't know if Joanna, you have anything to speak to for that, but I suspect that we're do if we were looking at just Canadian, we would be ranking, you know, better. But obviously, like Netflix just it just dominates the market.
Yeah, Netflix, and we're also seeing YouTube as a video source. So yeah, it is and it's really hard to just look at the Canadian market given what we know Canadians are spending time outside of our domestic streaming services, right? And so it would be hard for us to just look at the Canadian market when, as Katrina said, people are, Canadians are watching
More.
Netflix, Disney
Yeah,
Plus, YouTube.
fair. This might be a hard one to answer too, because maybe we don't do a lot of it. It's where do live sports fall into all of this? How are Canadians consuming sports? I guess outside of the major events, let's think of like the Super Bowl or playoff season.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one. So obviously, like the big events, like the Super Bowl is the number one program on television every year. Oscars are usually right below that, but Super Bowl is huge. Um, it, because these are things, I mean, the market is shifting, obviously. We're seeing streamers making deals now with sports. But sports are still huge, and a lot of we haven't seen the sort of defragmentation that we've seen with entertainment content. They're still primarily on the big networks, and Canadians are consuming them the same amount that they used to consume them.
We saw a big jump in traditional TV data just from April as the NHL playoffs, and we're still seeing it now with Edmonton in the final round. A lot of when Canadian teams are on it, especially Canadians are watching.
Fingers crossed for those Oilers. This is an interesting question that's come in. I noticed children's programming isn't mentioned anywhere. Curious if it was left off of these polls, or is it just simply not popular enough to be kind of aggregated in the data?
It's mostly a popular thing, and not necessarily because it's not popular, but because children are such a small percentage of television viewing, but also for a lot of the data that we collect, we're looking at 18 plus. So people aren't looking at children's content necessarily. We do still see parent age people saying, yes, I watch children's content. But when we look at like top programs on TV, they just don't pop up because it's such a small, most of those programs have a target of, 2 to 5 for this show or 5 to 7 for this show. So they just don't pop up the way the shows that the general population are watching.
And maybe a follow-up to that too. We saw a lot more data for obviously dramas and comedies, but somebody's like, what about documentaries? And I do know on one of the slides it was kind of lower on the percentage. Is there anything else you can kind of expand on when it comes to documentaries?
Yeah, so the first slide that we showed about the top programs is was traditional television, and typically the documentaries really don't float up to the top for that. But also typically like a lot of documentary, they're movies, right? So they're not in that top shows. But we do suspect that they're doing a lot better on streaming services than they are on traditional television. So it's a bit of a gap there for us, I guess.
Someone is asking, how did the broader data break out provincially, like and versus like any languages, English, French, or any other languages that aren't accounted for? And is it possible, and maybe we can include this in the follow-up doc for people to kind of get that information?
Yeah, a lot of the data we can look at, and then it'll we can cross it by those regions and age, and where possible, we did include the age and the generational information. But yes, there is a difference. Our data is mostly based on English Canada as we service English CBC. But we do have, our counterparts for Radio Canada for the French services. But sometimes we are able to look at French and English. It's a completely different market with a completely different landscape in terms of their competition. So, Yes, this here today was a focus really on the English market and English services.
Thanks. Do Canadians watch web series? And if so, how or where? And do you know, I'm sorry, and do you know about the digital, sorry, this was phrased a little weird, but maybe we'll do the first part of the question is, um, do Canadians watch web series? And if so, like where are they? Is it mostly YouTube or is it anywhere else?
Can
I
you
was just going to say that they do, and we know that YouTube is huge, but we don't really have a breakout of like what exactly people are watching on YouTube, but I suspect that that's obviously in there.
Okay.
just the time spent on YouTube is massive. And it's such a wide range of like short form pet videos, going to Disney 100-year-old shows. It's so vast and wide, but people are on YouTube. It is a dominant force, as Katrina said in her to launch the deck.
Nice. Besides how many views you get, what other ways are we measuring if a TV show or video is successful in Canada, especially online?
I can try to start that. Yes, in terms of views, that's a good digital measure. But when we're looking at a show, we need to go beyond just TV because we know that it's available and we need to be where people are. We need to be on digital streaming. We need to have access to streaming, even YouTube, off platform, outside of what we own and kind of take part in. So we're trying to, so how do you understand this multi-platform universe? What we've tried to do is look at time, so time spent. And so time is something that we can measure and capture through various sources, even with our external partners, and we can kind of add that together because 1 minute spent on TV is also a minute spent on YouTube, a minute spent on Gem. And we can try to aggregate that and look at a total time spent and look at what proportion is coming from the various sources. So that's one way that we can measure success using ratings. We also, in our various teams, especially within Katrina's survey team, there's survey tools that we can use to assess also the success of content by administering surveys through focused target segments to see how it resonates and collect that information.
Perfect. Now, I don't want to throw a wrench because I feel like we might not have the data on this yet, but how has our partners to the south affected the way, I guess, Canadians are viewing? And I know you touched on that briefly in the presentation, but someone asked us how are the tariffs, if the tariffs, or just maybe if, just let's say the behavior of our friends to the south affecting how Canadians are actually watching content.
Yeah, I think the short answer is just we don't know yet.
Yeah.
We're waiting to see, and we're definitely keeping an eye on it, and we're aware of it, and we're curious to see how this might play out in ratings.
Okay, I'm gonna ask one last question before we wrap up. And as data analyst, what's the one piece of advice you'd give a new Canadian creator who wants to grab and keep the attention of the Canadian audience? What kind of advice would you give them, keeping in mind how audience trends are going?
Um, Listen to your audience. I guess, think audience first. We spent about an hour here telling basically sharing what Canadians say they want. And it's important to have good plot and be authentic. Use your authentic voice, and with that, it'll create good content that Canadians want to watch. And use your resources, use your friends and family. Try to get out there. You have your own access to your own focus groups. Talk and share your ideas and try to get that feedback. And I think that Canadians are craving content. They're willing to take chances, and as long as you've taken lots of what audience first decisions are, it should create some compelling content that will have interest for it.
And I think just to add to what Joanna was saying, I really think what stands out for me is just that authentic piece that Joanna pointed out. Tell your story. I think people and Canadians are really savvy and can tell when someone's just trying to like check off a box, or they're forcing something, or they're following some sort of a recipe to like create this hit show. Sometimes I think about that TikTok series. I don't know if anybody watched it, but that Who the F Did I Marry? Where it's literally just a lady with her phone telling her story, and she was like genuine, and she seemed very vulnerable and likable, and like sometimes she was just in her car, sometimes she was in her bathroom. I'm pretty sure I remember, but and I'm not suggesting you do that at all, but just it was engaging because she had a good story and she was telling her story, and that's all she did. She just told her story, and that was enough to get like 400 million views in a really short period of time. So I'm not suggesting you go make content with your phone, but just like a reminder that like people just want a good story at the end of the day.
Yeah, we all want to feel connected, you know? So thank you so much, Johanna and Katrina, for that detailed and very informative presentation on Canadian audiences and what they're watching and what they want to see. Thank you so much for taking time. And we would also like to thank CBC for hosting, and our planning partners, CMPA and Cavco, for their continued support with the One Stop series. We hope you all really enjoyed the presentation and found it useful. And again, hoping that you keep what was said here in mind as you're building your projects. And we're hoping that you can join us for our next session that's happening tomorrow. And we will be covering interprovincial co-productions. You do not want to miss that. And just a little bit of hot off the press information. Our next One Stop Business Workshop in-person session is going to be in Montreal this November, 18th and 19th. So please stay tuned to the Facebook group. You can reach out to myself for more details. And lastly, as stated, we will be sending around a takeaway document. So we'll have resources such as the presentation today, and we'll link to the recordings. We've made a playlist for our Canada Now series, and that will come at the end of the series. So expect it around Friday. In addition, there will be an evaluation form. This is very helpful for us, so we know what content to bring you, what information you guys are kind of looking for. And we just want to continue to build this network. So thanks to everyone, to our ASL interpreters, to our closed caption and our closed captioner. It takes a whole team to run these. So thanks everyone in front and behind the scenes. And we'll see you tomorrow. Have a great day. Bye.